The data is unambiguous. Boys and men are facing a deep and growing crisis. And yet, too often, this reality is either ignored or treated with suspicion, as if acknowledging it somehow detracts from the important work still needed to support girls and women. But that mindset is short-sighted and ultimately self-defeating. The truth is, if we care about building a truly inclusive and thriving society, we must be willing to look this crisis squarely in the eye. Today, boys are more likely than girls to be suspended from school, to be diagnosed with behavioral disorders, and to fall behind in reading and writing from a very young age. The gaps open early. By kindergarten, boys already lag behind girls in key developmental milestones. And as the years go on, the gaps only widen. Boys are less likely to graduate from high school, less likely to go to college, and less likely to complete their degrees if they do enroll. In fact, the gender gap in higher education today is wider than it was when women were the underrepresented group. Only now it's boys and men who are falling behind. The education system has simply not adapted to the different developmental trajectories of boys and girls. Boys' brains typically develop later than girls in areas crucial for academic success, such as impulse control and language skills. Yet rather than adjusting teaching methods or school structures to reflect these biological realities, we continue to use a model that inadvertently disadvantages boys from the start. This is not a matter of excusing bad behavior or lowering standards. It is about acknowledging that different groups may need different kinds of support to reach the same standards. That, after all, is what equity truly means. But the crisis goes far beyond education. In the labor market, men are also struggling. The participation rate for prime age men, those between the ages of 25 and 54, has been declining steadily for decades. Many have simply dropped out of the workforce altogether. While some shifts can be attributed to economic restructuring and the decline of traditional male-dominated industries like manufacturing, the deeper issue is a loss of direction, a loss of purpose. Work is more than just a paycheck. For many men, it is closely tied to their identity and their sense of contribution to society. Without meaningful work, too many men drift into despair, often compounded by isolation and a sense of worthlessness. Mental health statistics paint a grim picture. Men are far more likely than women to die by suicide, and rates of depression, substance abuse, and overdose deaths are alarmingly high among men, particularly those with lower levels of education. When we talk about deaths of despair, the rise in deaths from suicide, alcohol, and drugs, we are largely talking about men. And yet, discussions around mental health often focus disproportionately on women and girls, leaving many men to suffer in silence, their pain invisible. It is critical to recognize that acknowledging the struggles of boys and men is not a zero-sum game. Progress for one group does not necessitate the decline of another. Indeed, ignoring these issues serves no one. It only deepens divisions, feeds resentment, and leaves entire communities vulnerable to political extremism and social decay. A truly progressive vision must be capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time, championing the rights of girls and women while also extending compassion and support to boys and men. There is a profound irony here. Many on the political left have long championed the cause of marginalized groups, arguing rightly that systemic barriers can hold people back and that social structures often need reform. But when it comes to boys and men, there is a hesitancy to apply that same framework. Instead, there is often a tendency to see the struggles of males as either self-inflicted or simply the deserved consequence of a history of male dominance. This attitude is both intellectually lazy and morally wrong. No serious advocate for social justice should turn a blind eye to the suffering of any group. If we only concern ourselves with injustice when it fits a pre-approved narrative, we are not truly committed to justice at all. Real compassion requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, to adapt our strategies in light of new evidence, and to extend our circle of concern even, and perhaps especially, when it challenges our preconceptions. The fact that many men today are struggling does not negate the reality that women have faced and continue to face systemic barriers of their own. It simply means that the landscape has become more complicated, more nuanced, and that our policies and cultural narratives must evolve accordingly. The world is changing rapidly, and our understanding of gender must keep pace with those changes. Clinging to outdated assumptions about male privilege in a context where so many men are floundering is not just bad politics, it's bad morality. We must resist the urge to fall into binary thinking, where acknowledging the pain of one group is seen as an attack on another. The reality is far richer and far messier than that. A boy growing up today in a struggling community, in a broken education system, with few prospects for stable work, is not sitting atop a throne of privilege. He is navigating a system that in many ways has failed him just as surely as it has failed others before him. If we want to build a society that is truly equitable, we must be willing to ask hard questions and confront hard truths, even when they cut against the grain of our assumptions. Boys and men are in crisis. The evidence is overwhelming, and it is past time for those who care about justice, progress, and human dignity to say so out loud. The future of our boys, and by extension, the health of our society, depends on it. True progressivism has always been about broadening our moral circle, about extending concern, rights, and opportunities to those who have been overlooked, marginalized, or disadvantaged. It has been about lifting up the vulnerable, ensuring fairness, and correcting injustices that history and society have allowed to persist for too long. But to stay true to that mission today, we must be willing to confront a new and uncomfortable reality. Boys and men are struggling, and they need our help. It is easy to overlook this fact. Some even find it tempting to dismiss the struggles of boys and men as somehow less important, or worse, to frame them as a kind of deserved comeuppance for generations of male dominance. But that is not justice. That is not progress. Progress is not about swapping one hierarchy for another, or turning a blind eye to suffering just because of who is suffering. If we believe in fairness, if we believe in compassion, if we believe in a society where everyone has the opportunity to flourish, then we cannot pick and choose which struggles we recognize. Pain is pain, whether it is experienced by a girl from a working class family or a boy who feels increasingly alienated from a society. That doesn't seem to have a place for him. The numbers are stark. Boys are falling behind in education from the earliest grades all the way through college. They are more likely to be diagnosed with behavioral problems, more likely to be suspended, and less likely to graduate. In adulthood, men are more likely to die deaths of despair, suicide, overdose, alcoholism. Labor market participation among men has been declining steadily, even as opportunities for women have rightly expanded. There is no serious question that boys and men, especially those from working class backgrounds, are in trouble. The only question is whether we have the political and moral courage to respond. This should not be a controversial statement. Caring about the struggles of boys and men does not mean rolling back gains for women and girls. This is not a zero-sum game. It is entirely possible, in fact, it is necessary to hold two thoughts in our heads at once: that the advancement of women and girls remains a crucial unfinished project, and that the struggles of boys and men also demand our attention. A genuinely progressive society does both. And yet, too often, there is a tendency to resist this idea. There is a fear, I think, among some progressives that acknowledging the problems facing boys and men will somehow undermine the fight for gender equality, that it will be weaponized by those who seek to halt or reverse the gains women have made. I understand that fear, right? But refusing to engage with these realities does not protect the cause of equality. It weakens it. It leaves the field open for others, often with less benevolent intentions, to speak to the concerns of boys and men. It creates a vacuum that can be filled by voices offering not hope and inclusion, but resentment and grievance. If we, the progressive community, do not offer boys and men a story in which they can see themselves, a story of belonging, of purpose, of growth, then someone else will. And that story may be far less healthy, far less constructive than the one we could offer. It may be a story that turns their legitimate struggles into fuel for anger, division, and reactionary politics. We have already seen glimpses of this. The rise of certain online communities that prey on young men's feelings of dislocation is not an accident. It is a direct consequence of our failure to offer a better, truer narrative. Progressives have always understood that those who feel invisible, excluded, or left behind are vulnerable to dangerous ideologies. That is why we fight for civil rights. That is why we fight for the working class. That is why we fight for immigrants and for LGBTQ+ youth. We understand that belonging is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Boys and men deserve that same understanding. They deserve to be seen, they deserve to be heard, they deserve to be helped. This is not just a moral imperative, it is a practical one. No society can thrive if half its population is struggling. No democracy can flourish if millions of young men feel disconnected from the educational system, the labor market, and even from the basic promise of upward mobility. No community can be healthy if despair is allowed to fester unchecked. Ignoring the plight of boys and men is not just an act of moral negligence, it is a strategic mistake of the highest order. We know how to respond when other groups face systemic barriers. We invest in targeted interventions. We design supportive policies. We shift our systems to meet people where they are, rather than expecting everyone to fit a single rigid mold. The same approach must be applied here. We need educational reforms that acknowledge boys often learn differently, and that literacy in particular must be a top priority in the early years. We need mental health initiatives that are accessible and appealing to men who are less likely to seek help through traditional channels. We need workforce programs that provide clear, attainable pathways into good jobs, especially for those without four-year degrees. And we need a broader cultural shift that recognizes there are many ways to be a good man, not just one. We cannot be selective in our compassion. We cannot pick and choose which forms of suffering deserve our attention. If we say we believe in equity, then we must believe in it for everyone. One of the clearest and most urgent signs of the crisis facing boys and men today is in our education system, and yet it's often the area where the silence is loudest. For decades now, the conversation about education has rightly centered on lifting up groups who have been historically marginalized, on closing the racial achievement gap, on improving access for girls in STEM fields, and on expanding opportunity for the economically disadvantaged. Maybe these are noble efforts. Many have borne real fruit. But in the process, something else has been happening, something that does not fit neatly into the traditional narratives about privilege and oppression. Boys, across all racial and socioeconomic groups, are falling behind, especially those from lower income backgrounds, are increasingly adrift in a system that seems ill-suited to their developmental needs. We can't address what we refuse to acknowledge. Ignoring these disparities because they are uncomfortable or because they complicate a preferred ideological framework is not just intellectually dishonest, it is a betrayal of the very commitment to fairness and equity that the left prides itself on. What's happening to boys in education is not just about academic achievement, it's about the foundational development of skills and identity. Boys are more likely to be diagnosed with learning disabilities, more likely to be suspended or expelled, and more likely to be perceived as troublemakers rather than students who need different forms of support. Much of our educational model today demands early mastery of verbal and emotional regulation skills, areas where boys, on average, develop later than girls. The result is an early and persistent mismatch between what is expected of boys and what many of them are developmentally prepared to deliver. We are setting them up for a sense of failure before they've even had a fair shot. This isn't an argument for lowering standards or making excuses. It's an argument for applying the same lens of care, science, and structural analysis to boys' outcomes that progressives already apply elsewhere. If we know that early reading proficiency is crucial for later success, and we do, then we should be deeply alarmed that boys are consistently lagging behind girls in literacy by the end of elementary school. If we know that school suspension correlates strongly with later involvement in the criminal justice system, and it does, then we should be urgently questioning why boys, particularly black boys, are disciplined at rates far exceeding their peers. It is impossible to look at this data and conclude that everything is fine. It is equally impossible, or should be, to look at this data and conclude that these outcomes are purely the result of individual choices or failures. If we were seeing these kinds of disparities reversed, if girls were falling this far behind, there would be no hesitation in calling it a systemic failure. We would have task forces, emergency funding, national debates. There would be no question that a response was needed. Boys deserve the same urgency. We need to redesign parts of our education system with boys' developmental patterns in mind. That could mean starting boys in formal schooling a year later, an approach backed by a growing body of research showing that a later school start benefits boys academically and socially. It could mean more investment in male-friendly reading programs that meet boys where they are, leveraging their interests to build literacy without shame. It certainly means rethinking discipline policies to focus more on mentorship and relational support rather than just punishment. None of this is about favoritism, it's about fairness. It's about recognizing that equality of opportunity requires us to respond to actual differences in development and experience, not to pretend that every child walks into a classroom with the same needs, the same skills, or the same chances. Ignoring these differences doesn't create fairness, it entrenches inequality. It is not just the individual boys who suffer when they fall behind. The effects ripple outward, weakening communities, constricting the economy, and sowing resentment and alienation that can later metastasize into more dangerous social phenomena. We are seeing it already in rising male disengagement from the labor force, in spikes in so-called deaths of despair, and in the growing appeal of extremist movements that promise disaffected young men a sense of belonging they cannot find elsewhere. A progressive movement that is serious about building a better future must be serious about addressing this educational crisis. That means being willing to face hard truths, even when they don't fit neatly into existing narratives. It means being willing to talk about boys and men not as oppressors or obstacles, but as fellow citizens who are struggling and in need of support. None of this diminishes the urgent work still needed to support girls and women. Progress is not a zero-sum game. We are capable of holding two thoughts at once, that advancing women's rights and opportunities remains vital, and that the plight of boys and men today demands serious attention. We can and must do both. The longer we wait, the greater the costs will be for boys themselves, for the society they will inherit, and for the ideals of justice and equity that we claim to hold dear. We cannot claim to be building a truly inclusive, fair society if we turn away from the reality staring us in the face. The solution to toxic masculinity is not the abolition of masculinity itself. Yet, that seems to be the assumption in many circles today, that somehow, if we just strip away traditional notions of manhood, boys and men will automatically flourish. It doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way. Boys and men do not stop needing a positive identity simply because the old models are rightly criticized. What happens instead, and what we are seeing now in real time, is a vacuum. And vacuums never stay empty for long. If we do not offer boys and men a constructive, affirming vision of what it means to be a good man today, they will seek out definitions elsewhere, sometimes in the wrong places, sometimes from figures who prey on their insecurities and their confusion. If the only messages young men hear are either "you are the problem" or "you don't matter," it should not surprise us that some turn to more extreme narratives that promise status, belonging, and purpose, even if those promises are hollow or harmful. We must recognize that masculinity itself is not the enemy. Masculinity, properly understood, is a vital, powerful force for good. Courage, resilience, protectiveness, leadership, responsibility. These are masculine traits when rightly channeled. They are not toxic. They are necessary. They are deeply human. But if we fail to nurture and guide these qualities, if we treat them as suspect simply because they are associated with boys and men, then we leave an entire generation adrift. Some of the most important work ahead of us is to redefine masculinity for the modern age without destroying it. To create a new script that allows boys and men to aspire to greatness, not at the expense of others, not through domination, but through service, strength, and integrity. We need to affirm that it is good for a young man to want to be strong, so long as that strength is used to lift others up. That it is good for a man to seek leadership, so long as he leads with humility and wisdom. That it is good for a man to seek to provide, so long as he understands that providing is about more than material goods. It is about emotional and moral contribution as well. But now we are doing a poor job of giving boys these positive scripts. In fact, in many cases, we are offering no script at all. Boys are left to piece together an identity from fragments, a bit of pop culture here, a bit of online rhetoric there, and very little real guidance from the adults in their lives. Particularly for boys growing up without stable fathers or male mentors, the absence of a positive masculine model is deeply damaging. They are left to guess at what it means to be a man, or worse, to assume that being a man is, in itself, a problem that needs fixing. And when institutions that should be helping, schools, community programs, even media platforms, shy away from even acknowledging boys' unique struggles, the message they receive is deafening in its silence. You are on your own. You do not belong here. Your future is not our concern. It is not enough to tell boys what not to be. We must show them what they can be, what they should strive to be, and why their efforts matter. There is a deep hunger among young men today for meaning and belonging. They want to feel that they have a role to play in their families, their communities, their nations. They want to know that their struggles are seen, their ambitions are legitimate, their contributions are valued. Ignoring this hunger does not make it go away. It drives young men into places where they are promised easy answers and simplistic solutions, often wrapped in misogyny, violence, and grievance. If the progressive movement is serious about justice and equity, it must be serious about offering boys and men a future they can believe in, not one where they are told to apologize simply for existing, but one where they are called to be the best version of themselves, where responsibility is seen not as a burden, but as an honor, where strength is not measured by domination, but by how well you protect and uplift those around you, where success is not about crushing others, but about achieving excellence through hard work, collaboration, and service. It is easy to criticize the old models of manhood, in many cases rightly so, but tearing down old models without building new ones is not liberation, it is abandonment. Boys need mentors, role models, rites of passage, and affirmations that growing into a good man is a worthy, noble goal. They need to see manhood not as a source of shame, but as a source of pride. Earned pride. Pride rooted in character and contribution. This is not about turning back the clock or restoring some mythical golden age of patriarchy. It is about moving forward into a future where masculinity and femininity alike are honored for what they can bring to human flourishing, where gender differences are acknowledged without being exaggerated, and where individuals are given the support they need to thrive on their own terms. We cannot build a society that works for everyone if we leave half the population feeling alienated and purposeless. We cannot achieve true equality by ignoring the real, specific challenges that boys and men face today. Progress means bringing everyone along, not just those who fit a certain political narrative. At the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of message are we sending to the next generation of boys? Are we offering them hope, purpose, and a path to meaningful adulthood, or are we abandoning them to figure it out on their own with all the risks that entail? If we are serious about progress, serious about compassion, serious about building a society that truly leaves no one behind, then it is time, long past time, to recognize that boys and men are in crisis and that our response must be to rebuild, not erase, their path to dignity. Thanks for watching this video. If you agree, then please subscribe this channel, like and share the video, and comment what next you want me to cover